Hi guys! So today's video is another compilation video, and in the spirit of equality, today I'm going to be talking about 4 women who were sentenced to death by hanging. And I suppose in not such a spirit of equality, they were spared because they were women. They were weaker, no. And yeah, so this is essentially 4 women who were saved from the gallows. Margaret and Daniel O'Sullivan lived in Colleany Moor in Kerry. This is about 4 miles from Killorglin, and it actually, their farmland sits just under Ireland's largest mountain range, which is McGillicuddy Reeks. So they had a farm and they had a 2-story house, and this was actually gifted to them by one of Margaret's former employers, a clergyman. I think that's weird, but let's go with it. The couple were married for 11 years but had no children. They, however, employed several farmhands to help them around the farm, and then in February 1922 they decided to hire someone to help Margaret with the house. I just feel like you already have everybody to deal with the farm, let's say, right? All you have left is a 2-story house. You don't have kids or anything. What could you possibly need help with? Like, if you want to just hire a maid, but to help her around the house, not to do the work around the house is what you want. They hired Hannah Flynn. I couldn't actually find out what age she was, but again, I just find that job would probably typically be by like a young girl, like late teens, you know, that type of thing, early 20s, but I'm not sure. However, after only 2 months, she was fired for disobedience and suspected theft. On the 1st of April 1923, this was actually Easter Sunday, Daniel was away at Mass. Now, don't ask me why Margaret wasn't also gone with him. You know, we're all super holy and religious. Why aren't you going on Easter Sunday? But she is behind. So Hannah arrives into the house and attacks Margaret in the kitchen. So she basically attacks her with a hatchet. I read that she almost slices her face off and stuff, so it's brutal. When Daniel arrives, he then obviously finds his wife dead on the kitchen floor. The house was ransacked and there was a considerable amount of money missing. Almost immediately, they knew it was Hannah. So she was arrested and tried. She was found guilty and sentenced to death on the 27th of February 1924. However, the jury strongly recommended mercy because of her, quote, low intellect. So she essentially was then, it was commuted to life in prison, and she went to Mountjoy. She stayed here until the 23rd of October 1942, where she was then released into the care of the Good Shepherd Magdalen Laundry in Limerick. So for a lot of these cases, that's what happens. Like, they'll be in prison for whatever amount of time, and then they're not released. They're basically just given to someone else, and they'll just work there, and that's where they stay. I'm not exactly sure how long. It just says a considerable time later, she's released into a hospital and she dies. Now, I have seen different sources say 18 up to 30 years. Okay guys, so I'm just going to get the next one over with. Warning, this one involves the death of a baby. So if you want to skip forward a little bit or stop watching. On the 11th of July 1938, Mary Somerville's daughter gave birth to a baby girl. This could have been considered a happy occasion, but her daughter was 17 and she was not married. Shortly after the baby was born, Mary Somerville brought the baby out to a pond nearby. It's a pond nearby the house. It's also described as a hole with water, and I've also seen it described as a well. So I don't know if it was necessarily an actual pond or a man-made thing for a well for water type thing. She put the baby into a bag with some rocks and threw it into the water. I'm not sure how the daughter, kind of responded to this. Did she kind of know that this is what had to happen? Or did she hate her mother, Because the baby's body was found a couple of weeks later and Mary was arrested. So I don't really have a lot of detail in terms of, did they question all the women in the house and they put it down to her? Did the daughter say it was her mother? I'm not sure. She went to trial, and on the 15th of November 1938, she was found guilty and sentenced to hang 2 days before Christmas. She appealed on the 8th of December, but this was refused. However, on the 13th, it was then commuted to penal servitude. I don't know how long she actually served, and I can't see anything about her actually then being transferred to, one of the Magdalen laundries or anything like that. I read that women were usually sentenced to death in the case of infanticide, but that obviously in the last 100 years, no one had been hung. I'm going to read the statement that Mary Somerville gave. On Monday, 11th of July, 1938, at about 3 a.m., my daughter Annie Somerville, aged 17 years and 8 months, gave birth to a baby girl in my house. The child was born in a bedroom. I attended at the birth. My 4 children, also my granddaughter, were sleeping in the room at the time. About 15 minutes after the child was born, I took it to the kitchen. The child was crying in the kitchen. About daybreak, I took the child up to a deep hole of water about 60 yards from the house, put 2 or 3 stones on top of the child in the bag, and dropped it into the water. Judge O'Byrne did even reference the fact, of, the shame that was brought to a home when an illegitimate child was born. I also just found another, not a statement, but something then about Mary, kind of her life. So it says, in her extreme youth, Mary Somerville, who was then employed as a domestic servant, gave birth to an illegitimate child. Now Mrs. Minnie Finley, wife of a carter, residing with her husband and family at High Street, Monaghan. Maybe I'm stupid. I assumed that means she had that illegitimate child, and that child stayed alive. They, continued on with life. A few years later, about 1905, Mary Latimer, as she then was, married John Somerville, a small farmer. She had the reputation of being of loose moral character. That was obviously because she did have the illegitimate child. It is freely stated in the locality that her husband, John Somerville, was not the father of some of the younger members of her family. This woman is a rough masculine type, appears to be below average intelligence, and did not appear to worry in the least as to the views or opinions regarding her. But if she didn't care or worry, then why did she kill the baby? Unless it was more so for her daughter's sake, that she didn't want that treatment then for her daughter. Interestingly, the letter that I'm going to read and other bits, I think, kind of contributed to her sentence being commuted, although I did say that no one who had been sentenced for infanticide in the previous years had been hung, so it's probably a bit of both. But a citizen of Waterford wrote a letter to the Taoiseach on the 10th of December 1938, so shortly before she was due to be hanged, and asks the Taoiseach to commute the sentence. I'm saying she, that's what I automatically went to, thinking it was another woman. However, it could also be a man, but I would have leaned towards my automatic thing was this was a woman who wrote it. So the letter read, she is to be executed because she put her young daughter's illegitimate infant into a well just after it was born. If the young mother had done that, they would not have hanged her. They never do, because apparently they realise that these dreadful things are done in moments of sheer insanity caused by shame and misery. That daughter's life in Ireland henceforth must be a life of disgrace and humiliation. Okay, I'll admit for this next one, I don't have some of the details in terms of the dates. So the woman in question, Agnes McAdam, was a 53-year-old woman who poisoned her neighbour with jam cakes. It says that she purchased the strychnine poison in 1942. And that, she said it was for rats. That's what they always say it's for. She lived in Ballybay, Monaghan, and she brought 2 sponge cakes to her neighbour James Finnegan. There was going to be a social for 2 priests that were leaving to go on, like the foreign missions, and so they were kind of having a bit of a get together, I think, to wave them off. So she was giving them to him. He must have been the one organising it or something. Again, as I said, there wasn't a lot of information, but she leaves these 2 cakes there. His daughter tried a bit, but she thought it tasted bitter in her mouth, so she spat it out. However, James cut up a nice big chunky slice and ate it. He must have also given some to the dog. And by the evening time, he's not well, like he's violently ill. Two of his nieces, Patricia O'Neill and her sister, who were both nurses, arrived to visit the family. Like I said, he was violently ill. He had lost the power in his legs. He was like, his face was turning blue. Now he could still speak and stuff. So Patricia mixed up like baking soda and water and made him drink it. It's called an emetic, but basically the idea is sort of for it to make you throw up. This didn't work. Patricia then went to call a doctor, but by the time she got back, her uncle was dead. The dog would also die. Agnes was brought to trial on the 12th of February 1946. Superintendent Cronin would say that when questioned after James died, that Agnes, because obviously they put it down to the cake, so they were like, where did the cakes come from? Agnes McAdam. Agnes would say that she bought them in nearby Smiths of Ballybay, and that she had kept them home. They were, in a parcel and stuff, and she kept them at home from the 22nd to the 28th of September, and then gave them to them that day. When it was questioned, like, it was actually even said, like, you passed their house on your way home, why didn't you just drop them in then? And she says, oh, it didn't come to mind. And then they said, well, why did you hang on to them for so long? And she said, well, I didn't know when the social was going to be. She also said, it is terrible sad about poor Jim. The defence argued that there was no motive. She had no grudges against her neighbour or anything like that. She would also kind of say, well, they were for the social, so for him to, she didn't know he was going to eat them, this type of thing. Which kind of begs the question that what if he hadn't eaten them and he did just bring them to the social and then everyone was poisoned? So was her plan actually to poison Jim, or was it to poison, just loads of people in the town, whatever's going on in her head? Which brings me to the 16th of February. She is found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. And Judge Gavin Duffy would say while passing the sentence, I got the impression that she was an odd and lonely creature who may have cherished some imaginary grudge against her community. It may be that she intended to give annoyance and put more poison into the cake than she intended. So maybe that was it. Maybe she kind of just thought, well, like, oh, I'll give them all diarrhea kind of thing and put too much in, Or did she intend for the slices to be smaller than, like if he was kind of like, oh no, I'm going to take a big huge chunk of this cake, but it was a chunk that could have done 3 people type thing if they were given to the social. I don't know, again, we don't really know, but I probably lean towards she didn't mean to necessarily kill him. On the 27th of March, she appealed the sentencing, but this was refused. However, on the 9th of April, it was commuted to penal servitude for life. They actually asked her brother and his wife, if they wanted to take her in, and they were like, no. So she was sent to the Good Shepherd in Ross, and I would have to assume that she also died here. Okay, so the last one is Francis Cox, and she lived with her brother, Richard, who was 34, and her mother, who was in her 70s. And they lived in Roskeen. It was a farm, of course, and this was near Mount Mellick in County Laois. Their mother hadn't left the farm since 1939, and so Richard and Francis basically looked after the farm, but I read that Francis done the majority of the work. So it was a large farm. They were actually wealthy Protestants, and the farm was 126 acres, so that's a lot of work. Francis was dating a young Catholic farmer, William Weston, and she intended to marry him. So this was obviously going to piss off her brother and mum, because obviously they were Protestants, Catholic, you can't do that because she would have to change her religion. Also, poor William only had 6 acres of land, and Francis would have to give up her status and her land and stuff to marry him. And I was like, what? So in May 1949, Richard fell ill, badly ill. And so on the 31st of May, on the 31st of May, his funeral was held and loads of people came out, to pay their respects. And as the hearse was leaving the family home, loads of Gardaí pull up. And the coffin was taken and they pulled up. It's not funny, obviously, but it's bizarre. They pulled up a screen and doctors got to work at taking Richard's organs out right there with all the mourners surrounding the car. The organs were then sent to Dublin to be examined, and the funeral service was allowed to go ahead then a couple of hours later. It was found that Richard died by poisoning. He had ingested enough strychnine to kill a horse. Once they realised that he had been poisoned, the suspicion fell upon Francis, and she would go to trial and plead not guilty and said that her brother must have committed suicide. The prosecution, however, argued that strychnine poisoning is it's horrible. It's a horrible way to go. It's agony. You're in agony for days, and that if he really did want to kill himself, there was much easier ways to do it and less painful ways to do it. After just 6 days, she was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. She would make several appeals, and eventually this was commuted to life in prison. However, it would later come out that Francis had been convicted of killing her 2-day-old son. So, not even 2 weeks before Richard was murdered, the Gardaí received an anonymous tip to search the Cox farm. When they arrived, Francis then, in her bedroom, opened a little tin box, and in there was the dead body of her son. The newborn baby had died from asphyxia, from its neck being crushed and its skull being fractured. Francis pled guilty to manslaughter. Argue that way what you will, but was basically bound to a £10 sum to keep the peace for 2 years. One of the sources actually kind of puts it as in, would they have been so lenient if they had known that she had already been convicted and found guilty of, this. But I would imagine that the trial took place locally, and surely if the other trial had only taken place not even 2 weeks before that, that would have taken place locally, and the locals, how would they not have known she was also just convicted of killing the baby? I don't know if Francis then went on to one of the other houses, the Magdalen laundries and stuff, I'm not sure. Or if she just stayed in prison and died, or if she got out at some point. But just to add to all of this, in his book Bloody Women by David Kiley, he basically says that Francis had had 2 other children. Not knowing who the fathers were, I'm assuming the other one was William Weston, whether he is William Weston, and where they are, I don't know. Now, I don't know how he knows that without knowing that the bodies are there. And he says, I think it's reasonable to conclude that Richard was aware of all 3 births. He might have considered the third to be a last straw and given Francis an ultimatum: toe the line or clear out. Francis saw the lucrative farm and the status that went with it slipping through her fingers. Richard's death would solve this problem. So guys, that is the women who escaped the gallows this time. If you like these, I know people like the male hanging one, so if you do, I'll do more, because obviously there were more people hanged, and obviously there was a lot of people saved from the gallows, especially in the later years. So I was actually going to do 5, but a lot of the women kill babies, and I just felt like I had enough baby killers in this one, so we'll leave them to another one. Oh, some news. So I joined Patreon. Yeah, bit the bullet and trying that out. So if you want to, if you can, obviously, if you're in a position to do it, you can, join up and just show a bit of support. There's a couple of different tiers, and there's different rewards or benefits or whatever they're called. So anybody who joins up anyway is going to get the videos early and ad-free, because obviously YouTube throws the ads on. Ad-free, and they'll go up a day or so earlier. You'll also get a little thank you note from me, and I'm hoping to do other things as well with it. Obviously, kind of have to see how it goes and stuff like that. Oh, you get shout outs, and that reminds me, I'd like to thank my first patron, I don't even know what you call them, but Susie, thank you so much. It was a real nice surprise when I saw it, because that when I put it up, it was a bit of a but yeah, that's so nice, so thank you. So yeah, anybody who signs up, I will obviously thank you. And then I will also be doing exclusive videos then for the next tier up, so they will only go on to Patreon, they won't be coming onto YouTube. And then if there's anything like you want to see, I was thinking maybe about doing like kind of private forums that people can discuss the cases. And it'll just be a bit more private than on YouTube kind of thing. And yeah, I think that's it. Everything is listed on it, obviously, so you can go have a look, and if you want to do it, you can do it. If you don't, you don't. Just okay, right, thanks, bye. If you don't want to, or that's something that you can't do right now, that's fine. Simply subscribing and then liking, commenting. I love seeing all the comments. I like it. Sometimes I'm a disaster with getting back to them, like just after they've been put up, but I do get to them. And sharing, like obviously if you have little true crime buddies, share the heck out of me. So thank you for all your support, and we shall see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.